I'm very excited about this project. I think it could really make a difference to the city. And when I'm asked, and I've been asked several times now, what attracted you to this project? It's the enthusiasm of those who are behind it. It's the kind of emerging qualities of Boise as a city. It's an amazing site. And it's a good program because rarely are library and theater and the arts put together with a synergy that's going to make them so much more than the individual parts. But we'll get to that at some point, to the design proposal for the library. I want to talk about generally cultural institutions, their new role in the city as we see it, how we address these issues of what is a library or a museum today, 21st century, in our society, as distinct from when the libraries of the 19th century took form and were very, very different kind of places. And I just want to say a couple of words of introduction before I actually even do that. I think that we've been living in a period where the public realm has been taken over and, in a sense, lost. First, we had the kind of change of cities where streets and squares and galleries, which were full of life, with shopping and so on, gave way to the car, and we started having strips, and then the malls evolved. And so much of cities today, the public realm is privatized. It's commercial malls, single purpose. They don't have the mix of culture and commerce and civic institutions, the kind of mix that always made cities so vital. And I feel that there's a reversal. Shopping centers are now being kind of reprogrammed and repurposed, and the malls are, while they're still on a conquest role, I think there's questions about these introvert, very privatized malls. And when I say malls, I'm thinking Asian cities. The malls are 2-3 million square feet. They're 4 blocks of a city. You get into them and you're guaranteed not to find your way out. And that's the formula. Don't let them find a way out. I mean, we're designing a couple of them and it's a struggle. Now, in that scheme of things, I think that cultural institutions have a particular role to play, and that is they become the kind of living room of the city. They are the places where people now gather. Libraries, first of all, libraries, because they're free, because they offer services, but museums and performing arts centers, and people don't go to hear music just because you could hear it at home more conveniently, but because they want to be part of a ritual of urban life, part of a community life. And some projects really encourage that, and other projects don't seem to encourage it that much. So I'm going to begin with a tale of 2 libraries. If I could, a tale of 2 libraries that we have worked on in the past, actually 20 years. First is the Vancouver Public Library, which was a paradigm change in the way we thought about public libraries. And when I first commissioned to pursue the building, it actually was a competitive design competition, which long process. I started thinking about just the history of libraries, and there's all the fantasy libraries as described by Borges, for example, the Argentinian writer and others. This was a rendering done of the fantasy library of Borges, and it's beautiful and it's exciting, but it's very opaque and it's very elitist and closed in. It's like a treasure house of books, but it's not exactly an inviting urban place. But there is a great tradition, and you go back to the Library of Alexandria. This is the National Library of France by the 19th century Labrouste. Great reading room surrounded by stacks. And this formula Sorry. Help. What happened? So this tradition, somebody at the, what did you do? This tradition of buildings which are kind of protective. This is the New York Public Library, but it's typical of 19th century libraries. It had a kind of imposing civic quality to it. The reading room was always at the heart of the building. It was surrounded by the book stacks, and as it turned its face to the city, it was opaque. Nobody knew what goes on in there except when you went in there. And when we came to the design process of the Vancouver Library, and there it is in the downtown Vancouver, the program was unusual. It said we should have reading rooms and we should have stacks and open stacks, all the things you'd expect. And then it says we want to have a place, a large space open to the public at large, which is outside the control of the library, a community room that will be open 24 hours a day. And how do you make this work? What is that room? And that was an interesting question to address, which actually led us to reinvent what the formula was. On your left is the diagram that could describe most public libraries in the 19th century. There's a great reading room, and it's surrounded by stacks, and it turns its back to the city. And that's the diagram that generated the design for Vancouver. The stacks are in a very efficient center block with all the processing of books and what goes with it. And the readers, the place, what I call the place for the community of readers, wraps around in a great gallery facing the city all around it, looking back to the stacks and looking out to the city. And then we invented a third element, which we called the Great Urban Wall. And it contained a large multi-level room, skylit, full of light, to which you flow in from all directions. And we nicknamed it the Urban Room. And for those of you who can read plans, you can see the plan of the building here, the big block of stacks and processing and circulation with the bridges that lead to the reading gallery, a place where you have more privacy than in a reading room, the traditional reading room, but you're still part of a community of readers, and you're connected to the city visually and otherwise. And this is the urban room, which actually is proven to be now for 20 years one of the most active places in downtown Vancouver. And so I'll take you on a little tour. You'll note this is the urban room, the urban wall with daycare centers and shops along it. The library itself is within the central block. We had to incorporate the federal office tower because they owned the site, which we integrated into the design of the library. And we had proposed then 20 years ago that the roof should be a public garden, reading garden available to the public, open 24 hours a day. And they said, you've gone too far. And I said, why? They said, well, can you think of the security and can you think of all the, this was then a drug district of Vancouver. All their imagination was wide open. They said no. And I'll come back to that later. I'm telling you that for a reason. And so you approached the building and you guys sort of just slid right into it and you came into this urban room. And again, big libraries, you always need to know where you are. You should never lose your way in those cultural complexes. And as you came in here, there were seven stories of library departments, completely visible. You could see where you need to go. You could see where everything is. And here you had shops and the kinds of cafes and so on that kind of have the right mix of activities and exhibitions and so on and so forth. And this room just became a part of the life of the city, receptions, dinners, celebrations, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I mean by a cultural building becoming more than just a place to go to read books or to get classes, that it becomes something which is the center of life of the city. And lots of new technology. You could see we introduced the concept of subfloors where you could rewire and distribute data. This was before laptops. In fact, before computers at the library. We were able to make that transition just because we had those subfloors, so that you actually have to make these buildings really flexible. They have a long life, and it takes this kind of technology to. And here you see the reading galleries where you have a sense of privacy, but a sense of community looking across from the stacks towards the reading carrels. And again, looking out to the reading galleries and the atria. And again, as you flow through into the urban room from the other side of the building. The building was made all of precast concrete, which was serving as formwork where we could pour structural concrete into the molds, thus getting a very powerful, strong, earthquake-resistant building with a beautiful finish of precast concrete that was made with local red granite, hence that beautiful color. And this, the building looks as well finished today, 20 years after, as when it was built. So some years later, Salt Lake also decided to build a public library. And by then they had gone to visit all the recent libraries, and they went to Vancouver. And they liked the idea of the urban room. And they called for an invited competition. This was much tougher getting a job than coming to visit you and just, you know, love at first sight. And this is the library site. It's right next to City Hall. You see the Wabash Mountains. Really a beautiful site. And they were ambitious about it in the sense of the urban room and a building that transforms the downtown. And it's tougher to transform Salt Lake downtown than to transform Boise downtown. I mean, the blocks are 600 foot square. The roads are 7 or 8 lanes wide because they had to have the carriages make U-turns when they planned them. And so it has that kind of very elusive scale in terms of urban life. And they presented us with this master plan, which I think was well intended, but really posed the problem. They placed the new library at this corner of the site where there would be new transit. The old library would be converted to something else. And they asked us to create a vital, active, urban outdoor piazza in the center of the block, the rest of it being housing. And in the life of me, I couldn't figure out how, hidden from the streets and kind of enclosed and surrounded by that kind of program, this would be a vital urban place. And so the question was, well, what do you do to make this more than just a place that looks good on plan? It says urban piazza. Students love drawing coffee houses all around, 35 coffee houses, like there's enough business for everybody, and feel it's going to work. I didn't do it again, did I? What am I doing?
It's the bottom button. You're hitting the bottom buttons.
Okay.
So you just have to hit the bottom.
Press it again. Thank you very much. What would I do without you? And again, in plan, this is the street with the transit arrival. A little piazza leads you in, and you discover this urban room. Shops along it, auditorium, cinemas, more cafes and shops out there. And then as you flow out, you come to this piazza that connects to City Hall. And we convinced the city not to build housing on this block, to make it public realm, 100%, and to encourage developers to build the housing on the surrounding blocks, using the library as the catalyst for the residential development, but leave the entire block, with the old library becoming a science museum. We also proposed that I missed here a diagram, I think. There it is. That there'd be a roof garden, a reading garden. We never give up. And should be accessible to the city at large. You don't need to go into the library. So we propose this crescent wall where the cinemas and shops are, and you can actually climb all the way up. And there was a lot of controversy over who's going to do this? Like, who's going to climb up this wall and to reach all the way up to the top? And there you see the big piazza. And they said, give us precedence. I just come back from China, so I had this handy. And there it is, with high railings for security. And it's quite a magical place overlooking the mountains. I think they have several weddings every week. People are just drawn to it. And here I come back to Vancouver. They got so jealous over this that last year we were asked to come back to Vancouver and convert the roof to a public reading garden. And next weekend, the mayor of Vancouver is cutting the ribbon to inaugurate the garden. And the urban room, looking into the main library mass block. The reading galleries are on the side. This is, I think this was actually the opening day. But there are events there almost every night of all kinds. And the children's library is a great attraction. It's also got an outdoor children area with an amphitheater. And the children are below these shades where they can pull them around and create intimacy with a whole series of reading rooms and event rooms for the kids designed by different artists. I mean, the whole, each and every part of the library was given a great deal of attention. And towards the mountains is this grand glass wall, which opens up the entire library to the mountains, but also to the city. So as you move around the city, you are drawn into the life of the building. It kind of seduces you, and because it tells you what's happening within it. And the most exciting thing about the Salt Lake Library is all the events that have taken place on that super block that we convinced the city to preserve, with concerts and book fairs and festivals and all kinds of things. This is a frequent a series of events that take place there. And so we made it into Archie. For those of you who can't read at a distance, this is the world-famous Salt Lake City Library. It's awesome. Wow, and double wow. Throw a triple wow for me. So what else would an architect want? I'm going to show you two more projects where the mission was a place for culture, a museum, conference center, but also a hub of the community. One is the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles, on which we've worked intermittently on many phases for 20 years, and the more recent Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas. And both of them are not quite what you'd call an urban site, but in that sense they're also a challenge, because how do you create a place of community not in the context of a city where people flow naturally, but one in which they're isolated? Skirball Center is off the 405 freeway, just below the Getty, for those who know LA. Further up the freeway, Getty is on top, and they had a big budget. We're at the bottom, and we had a smaller budget, and hence we also built in phases. And the site that was made available had been a garbage dump for 30 years. So it took some cleaning up and degassing. And then the site also had all the California specials. It was over a fault, earthquake fault. It's a fire hazard because of the hills, and it's in a mudslide area. And so the advice of the engineers was build a building concentrated in the middle and leave the rest of the land alone. We have a mudslide problem there, and we have a mudslide problem there. And we actually worked very hard to take all these problems and make them into an asset. The mudslide became a basin in which we put an amphitheater. And the fire break that we had to create became a sculpture garden, and so on and so forth. So we worked with the constraints of the site. And there it is, built over, the first phase was the museum and the conference center here, and then we expanded galleries, amphitheater in the mud basin, and a children's museum, and then event halls, and more classrooms, and more activity spaces, and so on. And this place is just hopping year-round, and it serves the entire community. They bus thousands, I don't know the exact number, but thousands of children in an endowment program from the various schools in LA every day, and feed them. And the building is really a series of pavilions in the landscape. For each room we got in the program that said we need this and that, we created a counter room as an outside space. And we said these become, the outside spaces in the California climate are as significant as activity spaces within. And that's what's actually happened, as I'll try to show you. This is one of the entries. And of course, this is an institution which I say nobody will ever walk to, because you have to take your life at risk to come down the freeway. And so this is a place you arrive by bus or by car. And it became part of the issue of this whole sense of arrival. It's got galleries with permanent exhibitions about the American Jewish experience. And it's got changing galleries. This is one of them where the kids are installing some exhibition here. It's got a children's museum centered around Noah's Ark and a whole series of animals and rainbows, which is one of the more popular children places. This is the sculpture garden that runs along the edge, which is also the fire break. And this is one of the courtyards, which has many, many lives. Garden, it opens to the natural landscape. It's the place of concerts, weddings, talks by authors. This is a mud basin, come amphitheater. And there it is in full action. And forever, the architecture and the landscape are so intertwined that they're totally seamless. Is this a building? Is it a landscape? I hope there's no answer. Crystal Bridges is in Bentonville, Arkansas, and the initiative for it came from Alice Walton, who is one of the heirs of Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. And she put together a major collection of American art and commissioned us, I think it's about 10 years ago now, to create the Crystal Bridges Museum. The name came from the design, and I'll explain that in a moment, on the family estate which abuts downtown. So this is downtown Bentonville, and I warn you not to open up your imagination too much about the term downtown. It does have a square, and there's a little 5 and 10 on it, which was the first Walton Walmart. And there's trails here, but this is a family estate with a beautiful house by the great American architect Fay Jones, the family house. And the question was, where do we build? This was a case where the client says, where should I build? Not, you're going to build there. And there were the hilltops, which are quite beautiful, but they've got amazing mature trees, which I didn't dare touch. And so I started thinking in terms of maybe we should build in the valley like the old mill towns. And of course, that raised the question of floods, because this is a stream bed and the waterway, and there's a Crystal Springs is right there. There's a site, as we cleared it, after we did make the decision to go down here, you can see what's on the hilltops. And I'd seen the spring and the water flowing, and so I proposed that an exciting thing would be to dam it, just like they did some of the mill towns, and create ponds by holding the water, and build a museum around it and crossing it. And then the question was, what about floods? And this is the US Corps of Engineers who control this waterway. So we had to meet with them, and they said, we said, okay, 100-year flood, what's that? They said, no, that's not enough. 500-year flood, not enough. Negotiations went on and on, then it turned out to be the 3,000-year flood. I said, go a little further and it'll be the Great Flood. And there we have the ponds with my early sketch of the pavilions that surround it and float in it with the water flowing right through. And there is the finished building sitting in this cove that you saw before, excavated. And the interesting thing is there was a lot of debate about the water quality and what happens when there's a torrential rain. And when there's a torrential rain, the water coming out of there is actually a waterfall. The water shoots all the way out to there. It's a sight to behold, because you feel the force of nature coming through, and wouldn't that become all full of mud and stuff? Actually, what you see here is untreated. It's completely part of nature. It's adapted ecologically. It's got turtles and fish and God knows what. And the water just goes right through in a perfectly balanced ecological condition. One of the questions about getting buildings to feel like they belong in that place was, how do we build this museum in such a pastoral site? And we decided to build it entirely out of local Arkansas pine. So the roofs are copper, and the structural walls are concrete with wood inlay into the concrete. But the structure itself of the entire building is laminated wood beams, very high tech, but straight out of the Arkansas forest. And you see here, these are the buildings that bridge across. The floor is a dam that holds the pond, but the roof is like a bridge. It's a suspension cable that goes from edge to edge, and it supports the wood structure. And all the galleries, all the buildings are built that way and are able to span. So you come down from above into the valley through these elevated towers, and that's one of the bridges that greets you, which is a social space and restaurant with the ponds on either side. And you start flowing, and as you flow, you're in nature and back in galleries, art and nature. We visited, during the design period, the Louisiana Museum outside Copenhagen, which is one of the few museums in the world that I know that has pavilions of galleries as buildings set in a landscape on the seashore. And that convinced everybody that yes, we could do it. And so you move through from pavilion to pavilion, and it opens up to these extraordinary views of water and the hills around you. And then art is set outside them and the galleries within them. And as you come through, there's a gallery, beautiful soft daylight coming through, and more galleries built with the wood structures above them with light coming from above. And each time that you walk through the building, it connects back to the outside, allows the stream beds to flow right through under. So you sit here, and on a rainy day, this is just the water gushing right through under you into the stream bed. So you really are kind of in observing nature and observing the seasons. Now, the reason one kind of enjoys showing this off is the impact it has had on Bentonville. First of all, it had the good fortune to be endowed by Walmart for free admission. It does help. And we planned this building for 300,000 visitors a year. They've now, year after year, exceeded 600,000. I was there last week. We're going to double up the lobby somehow. We're going to expand gallery space. But this has become the center of life of Bentonville. It's just changed the place. The downtown is transformed. It has 2 hotels that we used to always have to stay at the Quality Inn on the highway when we built this. It now has 21D Hotel, which is an art gallery hotel. There's art in the corridors and all that. So, I mean, it's transformative. And it takes the combination of the will and the program of those who run the museum and the design that fosters these objectives. And in this case, it was to have a place that's so wonderful to be in that people in Bentonville will feel this is like their place, their living room. They come there just to have a meal or just to walk around the trails, and they do look at the art. So we come to Boise, and some of the thoughts we've had for this building, and as I was asked today, how much of it is Boise and how much of it is things that you've done in other places. And I think it's always a fascinating combination. For me, every project is unique to the program and the place. And they do come out very different, which sometimes confuses the critics, because they say, why is that variation that happens from place to place? You could see that Crystal Bridges is very different from Skirbo, for example. But there are common denominators. The quest for daylight, the integration with nature, the attempt to maximize the quality of a site. And I call it the secrets of the site. You got to walk around that site and just start discovering what does it have to offer? How do you maximize that? And this was one of the early sketches after our first meeting, where there's the river and the green belt sort of flowing. And I felt that this is 8th Street and this is Capitol Street. And somehow we had to bunch up the flow of people that'll be coming from both sides and funnel them in a kind of pressure chamber right through to the water. And then we struggled. Library on this side, theater here, the arts program there. I mean, for several weeks, the models were, we built big physical models and we play with blocks. We get paid for it too. And so how to funnel through, and then how to have the theater celebrated by Capitol Street and the library kind of relate more to the memorial, to the Anne Frank Memorial. And above all, to have a great room, transparent and open room, that becomes so much part of the river that you're like in the river when you're in the building. Because when you move back, not very far, you don't even know the river is there. It's not so wide. So you really need to kind of position things carefully to get that proximity. And you see here the rendering of the model overlaying the site, Capitol Street, 8th, and this kind of line, which is the line of the view of what's happening there, and the building actually opening up. It collects you, it channels you, and it opens up again. So as things ended up, we have the library forming this block, the water is here, the theater is the blue, the arts and history. There's an active piazza on the street side, the city side, and some parking beyond that. And then this is the park pastoral side. But we also have an entrance from the riverside. So as you come down the trails, and as you running along the river, you can come into the building from this end and from that end. So it's a building of many entries. And this is a photograph of the model. We are here on Capitol Street. The river is there. We're flowing in from either sides. We flow in to this active piazza. There's a cafe here that opens up. There's some parking and bicycle parking here, and you flow into the entry. The arts program is along, opening up to the piazza. The theater is there, entering from the urban room, but also has a separate entrance if it's after hours or operating separately. The roof of the theater is a garden and an amphitheater for talks and recitals, small amphitheater overlooking the park to the west. And so is the roof of the Arts and History Building. And as you cross the bridge, you'll recognize the railing, this large glass expanse, which we need to figure out how to shade carefully and prevent the birds from flying into it. That is what greets you, and at night it will glow, and during the day, because we do not use tinted glass, we use clear glass, you'll see right into it, and there's the theater, and moving towards the Capitol, which you see right down there. Or looking across, this is the bridge, the railway bridge. I think that'd be a great place to have an apartment on that bridge. But there's a memorial, and it seamlessly flows and integrates into the library, and we might have some access at this point. And again, that side facing 8th Street with little courtyard gardens connecting to the library. And so this is arriving from 8th Street, and you ascend either by ramp or by foot to this plaza level. There's a coffee house, and there's the arts building with the arcaded walk that leads you to the roof gardens, which we will have open separately from the building, so you could visit it anytime. And then the main entrance leading to the urban room. Urban room, library, theater, arts, all come together. What you see here is not a polka dot floor. Actually, it's the shading pattern from a roof that we will develop that has within it kind of elements that give you the feeling that you're under a tree. So in order not to overheat, we are creating these printed patterns on the glass that are going to give you that sense that you're under a tree. And then as you do that, you see right through to the river beyond. As you enter the great reading room, there it is, and there are reading galleries that literally hover over the river and the park. There are 3 major beautiful trees that we are preserving that literally will touch the building. And again, looking towards the river and Capitol Street as it crosses the bridge. The roof over the theater with its gathering space. I didn't do that, did I? No. So, just to sort of conclude, each of these building types actually begins to transform our notion of what they used to be. And it's taken some doing, but it is not something that we are alone at. Many architects now recognize that role of cultural buildings. And I just wanted to sort of show you our own experience with that. This is the National Gallery of Canada, which we completed 25 years ago in the Capitol across from Parliament. Transparent, open, inviting, all the public life in the building on display. The National Gallery, the original National Gallery of Pope in Washington, basically an opaque building. Beautiful spaces within, but certainly not part of the cityscape and city life. And in a similar way, this is the courthouse we designed, federal courthouse in Springfield. We seized on the opportunity of 2 300-year-old trees at the center of the site that all other architects proposed to demolish in order to place the building. We wrapped it in spiral form around the 3 trees, thus making the entire building transparent. You flow up, the courthouses are up there, all the public spaces and the activities, again, visible to the city. And the traditional happens to be the Supreme Court, quite opaque, architecturally and otherwise. And finally, the kind of traditional performing arts building. This happens to be the Vienna Opera House. And in Kansas City, the Kaufman Center, we took the lobbies and joined them into one great public space and turned it towards the city to the south. And this is a place of much rich public life, well beyond just a performing arts center, as it faces the city. So, all being well, we will move forward to develop the plans. There'll be lots of discussion. There'll be lots of presentation. We hope to get feedback. We are not cynical about the feedback. We listen. We usually find a way to turn things for the better. I'll give you one example, not community feedback. In China and Singapore, you have to do feng shui. You know what feng shui is? It's, I guess I shouldn't call it superstitious, but thoughts about what makes a building work and for good things to happen in it. And when we designed the Marina Bay Sands, there were 3 towers and a symmetrical sky park sort of straddling both sides. And the feng shui master said, symmetry not good. And we then pushed the sky park asymmetrically, cantilevering it 60 meters, 160 meters, 100 times 3, right? 180 feet out asymmetrically to become the most important symbol. So thank you to Feng Shui and thank you for community input. Thank you.